My daughter stripped away the most sacred moment of my life. My own daughter, the little girl I held when she was barely breathing, stood at that hospital door and told me I wasn't welcome to meet my grandson. Imagine waiting your whole life for that first precious cry of hope, only to have it ripped from your heart by the very child you sacrificed everything for. That sound I'd dreamed of hearing, it died in the hallway as security dragged me away like a criminal. My hands are shaking as I tell you this story. The betrayal cuts so deep that some nights I can't breathe thinking about it. But before I tell you how I turned their cruelty into the most perfect revenge they'll never escape, please subscribe to this channel. I need to know I'm not alone in this darkness. Her words still pierce through me like broken glass. You'll just embarrass us. My daughter, the same little girl who used to crawl into my bed after nightmares, who called me her hero every single night. She looked at me with eyes colder than winter, and her husband Jason smirked behind her shoulder like he'd finally won some twisted game. Security came. 2 guards with hands on their belts, treating me like I was dangerous. Me, a father who worked his fingers to bone, who gave up his youth and dreams for his child's smile. They walked me down that sterile corridor while families around us celebrated new life. Outside in that parking lot, I sat in my rusted car staring at those glowing windows. Behind that glass, my grandson was taking his first breaths, making his first sounds, existing in a world where I wasn't allowed to touch him. The tears came harder than they ever had, even when I buried my wife. But betrayal can forge something stronger than anger. It can create wisdom. And what I did next would make them regret every cruel word, every moment they thought they could erase me from that child's life. Emily was born 28 years ago. She entered this world with her mother's gentle eyes and my stubborn jaw. I remember that moment, holding her tiny, fragile body for the first time, feeling her heartbeat against my chest. I whispered promises into her perfect little ears, sacred vows that became the foundation of everything I did afterward. Her mother was taken from us far too soon. Emily was just 8 years old when cancer stole the light from our home. In one devastating moment, I went from being a husband to being everything: mother, father, protector, provider. Every breath I took from that day forward was for her. The nights stretched into mornings as I worked. Double shifts, triple shifts, any overtime that meant an extra dollar in Emily's future. My hands grew rough and scarred. My back ached like an old man's. But when I walked through our front door and saw her face light up, every bruise was worth it. I learned to braid her hair, though my thick fingers fumbled with the strands for weeks. I packed school lunches with notes hidden inside, messages that said, "Daddy loves you," in my messy handwriting. When homework brought tears to her eyes, I sat beside her until my own eyes burned with exhaustion, helping her understand fractions and book reports and anything that mattered to her small world. We didn't have much. Our house was small, our car was old, our clothes came from thrift stores, but love, that we had in abundance. I stitched her torn shoes when new ones weren't possible. I skipped meals so her plate was always full. On winter nights when the heater broke and repair bills were impossible, I wrapped us in every blanket we owned and told her we were camping under the stars. She was my reason for breathing. Every sacrifice felt like a privilege when it came from love. When she cried for her mother, and she did cry so often, I swallowed my own grief to hold her steady. I'd stroke her hair and whisper, "You'll never be alone, sweetheart, not while I'm here." That was the promise that drove me through exhaustion, through loneliness, through the crushing weight of raising a child alone. Emily grew from that tiny girl who clung to my hand at the playground into a brilliant young woman who walked across her graduation stage. I sat in that auditorium with tears streaming down my face, knowing every sleepless night had been worth it. She was my greatest achievement, living proof that love could overcome anything. At least, that's what I believed back then. Some memories burn brighter than others. I remember teaching Emily to ride her first bicycle on a summer evening when the sky painted itself orange and purple. She was so small, her feet barely reached the pedals, and fear made her voice tremble. "Dad, don't let go, okay?" she pleaded, her eyes wide and trusting. I promised I wouldn't. For a while I kept that promise, running alongside her with my hand steadying the seat. But eventually I had to loosen my grip. She wobbled, nearly fell, then found her balance. Suddenly she was flying down the street, her laughter echoing through the neighborhood like music. In that moment I realized something that both thrilled and terrified me. Every day she would need me a little less, but I would always need her just the same. There were school projects scattered across our kitchen table, her forehead wrinkled in concentration as she tried to master whatever subject challenged her that week. I stayed up all night cutting cardboard shapes, gluing pieces together, my eyes burning but my heart full because we were a team. When she got an A, she never ran to me shouting, "I did it!" It was always, "We did it, Dad!" She never forgot that we were in everything together. Rainy afternoons found us by the window with mugs of hot cocoa, watching raindrops race down the glass. She'd name each drop, cheering when her favorite reached the bottom first. Those simple games became the glue that held us together through life's storms. Bedtime was sacred. She'd beg for just one more story, and I always gave in because those moments were precious beyond measure. I told her tales of brave knights, of lost princesses, of fathers who moved mountains for their children. Every night, before sleep claimed her, she'd whisper those 3 words that made every hardship worthwhile. "You're my hero, Dad." Do you understand what it means to be someone's hero? To be the center of their universe, their safe harbor in every storm? I carried those words like armor through years of exhaustion and sacrifice. She made me believe I was enough. So years later, sitting in that hospital parking lot with my heart shattered into pieces, those memories flooded back like a tsunami. The little girl who once called me her hero had just turned me away from the most important moment of both our lives. The ache in my chest wasn't just grief. It was the cruel realization that somewhere along the way, I had lost her. Everything began to change the day Emily brought Jason home. I told myself this was normal, natural even. She was building her own life, and I wanted to respect that journey. He walked through my front door with a firm handshake, a practiced smile, and eyes that never quite met mine directly. There was something unsettling in his gaze, a coldness that made my father's instincts prickle with warning. But I stayed quiet for Emily's sake, hoping I was wrong about the man she'd chosen to love. That first dinner revealed everything I needed to know. I watched how he spoke to her, not cruelly, not harshly, but with a quiet authority that suggested every word he said was final. When I asked Emily about her work, he answered for her. When I shared a funny memory from her childhood, he rolled his eyes and changed the subject. The message was clear. He wanted me in the background, preferably invisible. Over time, those small gestures became patterns that cut deeper with each occurrence. Emily started visiting less frequently. Phone calls grew shorter, filled with awkward silences. When I offered advice about anything, she'd sigh and say, "Dad, Jason thinks we should do it differently." That phrase became a knife twisting in my chest because it was never her choice anymore. It was always, "Jason thinks." The real crack in our relationship appeared one evening when I asked Jason about his plans for their future. I thought it was innocent enough. Just a father wanting to understand the man who held his daughter's heart. His response was like ice water in my veins. He smirked and said, "Don't worry about it. Times are different now. Emily doesn't need your old-fashioned opinions." Old-fashioned. That word cut deeper than he could have known. I had spent years holding our world together with nothing but determination and love. In his eyes, that made me irrelevant. I watched Emily's transformation with growing horror. She started defending his dismissive comments, even when they hurt me. Once, after Jason interrupted me mid-story with an obvious eye roll, I caught her glancing at him nervously, seeking his approval rather than caring about my feelings. I told myself love makes people blind, that maybe she couldn't see the control he exercised over her thoughts and choices. But deep in my heart, I feared something worse, that she saw it clearly and was choosing him anyway. That was the beginning of the distance that would eventually lead me to that hospital door, facing a rejection I never thought possible from my own flesh and blood. Emily's wedding day should have been the proudest moment of my life. Since she was a little girl twirling in her mother's old dresses, pretending to be a bride, I had imagined walking her down that aisle. I pictured placing her hand in the hand of the man who would love her, whispering, "Take care of my little girl." That sacred moment was supposed to be mine, a father's final duty and greatest honor. But when planning began, I watched my role shrink to nothing. Emily brushed aside my suggestions about venues, flowers, music. Every time I offered help, Jason's voice echoed louder. "We've got it handled." I became a guest in decisions where I thought I'd be essential. The killing blow came when Emily sat me down with tears in her eyes but steel in her voice. "Dad, we think it would be more modern if I walk alone down the aisle. It's my day. Please don't make this about you." Her words were sharp blades wrapped in soft cloth. I wanted to remind her of the nights I held her burning body through fevers, of the birthdays I made magical with scraps and creativity, of the countless times I chose her happiness over my own needs. But instead, I nodded. I told her I understood. Because at the end of the day, I wanted her happy, even if happiness meant swallowing my own pain. On her wedding day, I sat in the front row, with trembling hands as the music began. Emily walked down that aisle alone, beautiful and radiant, but every step she took away from tradition felt like a step away from me. My chest tightened as I blinked back tears, not tears of pride, but of loss. The look Jason gave me when their eyes met at the altar wasn't gratitude. It was triumph, as if he had finally succeeded in erasing me from her story. During the reception, I stood to give a toast, trying to speak from my heart about the woman who had been my whole world. Jason interrupted with a loud joke, and everyone laughed as my words drowned in their voices. I sat down, humiliated, realizing that I wasn't just losing my role that day, I was losing my daughter, piece by precious piece. The aisle she walked alone would be the first of many paths she'd choose without me. The phone rang late one night, jolting me from restless sleep. When I saw Emily's name on the screen, my heart leaped with hope and anxiety. Her voice shook with urgency as she said words I'd been waiting months to hear. "Dad, it's time. We're going to the hospital." Suddenly, all the distance, all the cold treatment, all the painful rejection melted away like winter snow. All I could think was that my little girl was about to become a mother, and I was about to become a grandfather. I threw on my clothes and grabbed the small bag I'd packed weeks earlier, just in case. Inside were treasures only a grandfather would think to bring: a soft blanket I'd saved from Emily's infancy, a stuffed animal I imagined my grandchild might someday love, and a handwritten letter for him to read when he was old enough to understand love that spans generations. My hands trembled as I zipped the bag closed, my chest tight with nervous joy. Driving through empty streets, my mind raced back to the night Emily was born. I remembered pacing those same kind of hospital corridors, terrified and exhilarated, praying I wouldn't fail as a father. When the doctor placed her in my arms for the first time, her tiny cries filled the room and my heart with purpose. That memory was so vivid it brought tears to my eyes as I drove, because now she was experiencing that same miracle. I imagined holding my grandson, brushing his soft cheek with my weathered hands, whispering the same promises I'd once whispered to his mother: "You will never be alone, not while I breathe." For the first time in years, I felt like maybe everything broken between Emily and me could be healed by this new life. A grandchild has a way of making old wounds seem small, of bringing families back together through shared wonder. I rehearsed what I might say when I saw her. Maybe I'd tell her how proud I was, how strong she was for bringing life into the world. Maybe I'd even thank Jason, hoping we could finally find common ground as two men who loved the same family. As I pulled into the hospital parking lot, my chest swelled with hope I hadn't felt in months. I had no idea that within minutes, that hope would be shattered into something far darker than anything I'd ever imagined. The hospital lights were blindingly bright, but to me, they felt like beacons guiding me toward the moment I'd been waiting for my entire life. I walked quickly through the lobby, my heart hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat. Around me, other families clustered together, grandmothers clutching flowers, uncles carrying balloons, siblings holding teddy bears. I smiled at them because I thought I belonged in their circle of joy. I thought I was just like them, about to welcome new life with open arms. I asked for Emily's room number, and the nurse gave it without hesitation, her face brightening at my obvious excitement. I thanked her twice, fumbling over my words, my anticipation so overwhelming I could barely speak coherently. Every step down that corridor echoed with memories, carrying Emily to her first doctor's appointment, her tiny hand clutching mine with perfect trust. Now here I was again, walking down another hospital hallway, ready to meet the next generation of my bloodline. On Emily's floor, families gathered outside rooms with faces glowing with pure happiness. Some cried tears of joy, others snapped pictures of this precious time. I couldn't help imagining my turn. Ellie's tired but proud smile, Jason awkwardly holding his son, and then finally, my arms around my grandson. I paced outside her room for a moment, straightening my jacket, rehearsing the words I wanted to say. "I'm so proud of you, Emily. You're stronger than you know." That's what I planned to tell her, because despite everything that had happened between us, she was still my little girl. The soft sound of a newborn's cry drifted from somewhere down the hall, and my knees nearly buckled with emotion. I thought it might be him, my grandson, just seconds away from my first embrace. My palms were sweating as I reached for the door handle. My whole body shook with anticipation and nervous energy. It felt like the entire world was holding its breath, waiting for me to step inside and claim my rightful place as a grandfather. But the moment I pushed open that door, everything I believed about family, about loyalty, about unconditional love, was about to be destroyed. The door opened, and for one brief, beautiful second, I thought I saw my dream coming true. Emily in the hospital bed, exhausted but glowing, the sound of new life somewhere close by. But before I could take a single step inside, Jason moved like a wall between me and my family. His smirk was already there, sharp and cruel, as if he'd been waiting for this exact moment to inflict maximum damage. Emily sat propped against white pillows, her hair damp with the sweat of labor, her face pale but beautiful. What crushed my soul wasn't her exhaustion, it was the coldness in her eyes when she looked at me. I smiled weakly, my voice trembling with hope as I whispered, "Sweetheart, I'm here. I can't believe you did it. Can I see him?" Her lips parted, but instead of welcoming me with love, she delivered words that cut me deeper than any physical wound ever could. "Dad, you're not welcome here. You'll just embarrass us." For several heartbeats, my brain refused to process what she'd said. I stood there blinking, waiting for her to laugh nervously and take it back, to tell me she was exhausted and didn't mean it. But Jason's arm tightened across the doorframe, and his smirk widened with sadistic satisfaction. He leaned closer and muttered like I was garbage. "You heard her. Leave." My face drained of all blood. My knees weakened until I thought I might collapse. Still, I fought to speak through my collapsing throat. "Emily, I'm your father. I just want to meet my grandson." My voice cracked on those words, but she didn't soften. She turned her face away, tears glistening in her eyes. But her silence told me everything. Jason's control over her was stronger than any bond we'd ever shared. Then came the final humiliation. Jason raised his hand like I was a disturbance and waved over 2 security guards. They approached with practiced indifference, hands resting on their belts as if I were dangerous. One said with cold professionalism, "Sir, you need to leave." I wanted to fight, to scream, to demand my place in that room, but my body felt paralyzed by shock and heartbreak. The world blurred as they guided me down the hall with firm hands on my shoulders. Other families turned to stare, some with confusion, others with pity that burned like acid. Behind me, muffled through the sorrow walls, I heard the sound I'd waited my entire life to experience, my grandson's first cry, but instead of joy, it brought only devastation, because I would never be allowed to hear it clearly, to hold him as he made those precious sounds. I was a grandfather, but in that moment, I had never felt more like a stranger to my own blood. I don't remember walking through those hospital doors. I don't remember the elevator ride, or how the cool night air felt when it hit my face. All I remember is collapsing into my car's driver's seat, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. Then the pain hit me like a physical blow. Tears came fast, hot, and uncontrollable. I buried my face in my hands and let out sounds I'd never heard from my own throat, raw, broken noises that came from a place deeper than sorrow. My chest heaved with every breath, each one sharp as broken glass in my lungs. I had been humiliated in front of strangers, rejected by my own daughter, and robbed of the moment I'd dreamed about for months. The weight of it felt like it might kill me right there in that parking lot. I stared up at those glowing hospital windows through my tears. Somewhere behind that glass, my grandson was breathing his first breaths, crying his first cries, existing in a world where I was forbidden to touch him. The thought tore through me like wildfire. All those years of sacrifice seemed to crumble into dust in that moment. Every meal I'd skipped so Emily could eat, every back-breaking double shift, every bedtime story I'd told to chase away her fears. What had any of it meant if this was how she repaid my love? I kept asking myself the same torturous question. How did we get here? How did the little girl who once clung to my hand at the fair, who whispered that I was her hero every single night, come to look at me like I was something shameful? When had I become an outsider in the very life I'd built with my own blood, sweat, and endless devotion? The betrayal cut deeper because it was so unexpected. I'd always feared Jason might try to push me aside, but I never believed Emily would let him succeed. I never imagined she would stand there and watch me be escorted away like trash. That look in her eyes, cold, distant, almost ashamed of me, haunted me more than any words she could have spoken. I sat there for hours, unable to move, my tears soaking the steering wheel. At some point, the cruel irony struck me. Years ago, I'd been inside a hospital just like this one, holding Emily in my arms for the first time, vowing to protect her with my life. Now, in almost the same setting, she had turned her back on me completely. The circle felt twisted, wrong, like some cosmic joke at my expense. As the night grew colder and my tears finally dried, one truth settled heavy in my chest like a stone. I was no longer her hero. In her eyes, I was nothing at all. Sitting in that dark parking lot, staring at windows that held my grandson but barred me from his life, my mind drifted backward to the day that changed everything. The day I lost my wife and became Emily's entire world. Emily was only 8 years old when cancer stole her mother from us, far too young to carry the kind of grief that crashed into our home like a hurricane. I remember standing at the foot of that hospital bed, clutching my wife's frail hand, praying for miracles that never came. She looked at me with eyes that were fading but still blazing with love. Her voice was barely a whisper, but her words branded themselves into my soul forever. Take care of her. Promise me. Promise you'll always protect our little girl. I held back my own tears because I couldn't let her see me break. I leaned down, pressed my forehead against hers, and whispered back, I swear on my life, she'll never feel alone, not while I breathe. In that moment, I became both mother and father, protector and provider. That promise became my life's sacred mission, the foundation of every decision I made from that day forward. I still remember the first night after the funeral. Emily sat curled in her little bed, clutching her stuffed rabbit, her cheeks stained with tears that broke my heart into pieces. She looked at me with swollen red eyes and asked in a voice that still haunts me, Daddy, what will we do now? My heart nearly shattered completely, but I forced the strongest smile I could manage. I wrapped her in my arms and whispered words that became our anthem. We'll do it together, sweetheart, you and me against the world. Every decision from that moment was anchored to my promise. I worked myself past exhaustion so she would never know hunger. I forced smiles when I wanted to scream, just so she could feel safe in our storm. I became her rock because that's what her dying mother needed me to be. For years, I believed I'd kept that sacred promise. I was there for every scraped knee, every broken heart, every school play, and graduation. I was her shield, her cheerleader, her safe harbor. But sitting outside that hospital with security guards' fingerprints still burning on my shoulders, I couldn't escape a terrible thought. Had I failed her? Had I broken the one promise I swore to keep? Or had she simply chosen to forget everything I'd sacrificed to honor her mother's dying words? Either way, the weight of that deathbed promise pressed harder on my chest that night than it ever had. For the first time since I buried my wife, I felt like I'd let them both down. The anger came next, boiling through my veins like molten steel. 1,000 violent thoughts screamed in my head. I imagined storming back inside, shoving Jason aside, demanding to hold my grandson. I pictured myself shouting until my voice broke, letting the whole world know what they'd done to me. I even imagined my fist connecting with that smug face that had smirked while guards dragged me away. But then something stopped me cold. What would that accomplish? Did I really want my first memory with my grandson to be of his grandfather being arrested? Would I want Emily's story of me to be one of violence and rage? No, that wasn't who I was. That wasn't who her mother had asked me to become. I thought about my wife again, about that sacred promise I'd made at her bedside. Protect her. Those words weren't just about keeping Emily fed and safe. They were about protecting the love in my own heart from turning into something ugly and destructive. So I forced myself to breathe deeply. I gripped that steering wheel until my knuckles went white, until the fury began to fade and something colder, sharper, clearer took its place. If they wanted me gone, if they wanted to treat me like I was nothing, then I would become nothing in their world. But I would also become something far more powerful, something they could never control, never silence, never erase. That night, sitting in my car with my heart torn open, I made a decision that would change everything. My revenge wouldn't be loud or messy or reckless. It would be the kind of revenge that lingers in silence, that haunts with patience, that makes people wish they'd never pushed away the one person who truly loved them. I would let them believe they'd won, let them laugh at my absence, let them think I was powerless, And then, when the time was right, they would realize just how wrong they'd been. Revenge doesn't always have to roar with anger. Sometimes the most devastating revenge whispers with wisdom, waits with patience, and strikes with precision that cuts deeper than any outburst ever could. They thought they'd broken me that night, but what they'd really done was awaken a side of me I didn't even know existed, the part that would strike not with fury, but with calculated love that would outlast their cruelty. Throughout Emily's entire childhood, I'd lived with one quiet mission burning in the back of my mind, building something for her future that would give her choices I'd never had. I didn't have much. My job barely covered our monthly bills, and there were times when I wasn't sure we'd make it to the next payday. But I tightened my belt and kept pushing forward. Every dollar I managed to save, I told myself the same thing. This is for her. This is for the life she deserves. At first, it was just spare change dropped into a coffee jar on the kitchen counter. $5 bills folded carefully into an envelope hidden in the back of my dresser drawer. Later, when I found steadier work, I opened a savings account and began transferring small amounts each month. It wasn't much compared to what other parents could do for their children, but over the years it grew steadily, slowly, patiently, like a tree taking root in dry soil and refusing to give up. I never told Emily about this secret fund. It was my private way of keeping that deathbed promise alive, my insurance policy against an uncertain world. I imagined surprising her on her wedding day, telling her, "This is everything I could scrape together, everything I have, so you can start your new family with hope instead of struggle." I pictured the tears in her eyes, the gratitude, the embrace that would make every sacrifice worthwhile. But after her wedding, when I felt Jason's poisonous influence pulling her further from me each day, I changed my plan. Instead of giving it away too soon, I decided to let it grow longer, untouched, meant not just for Emily, but for the children she might have. My grandchildren, the next generation who would carry our bloodline forward. I dreamed of birthdays where I could surprise them with gifts bought from interest earnings alone. I imagined telling them someday, "Your grandfather worked himself to the bone so you could have opportunities, so you could have choices I never dreamed of." That vision carried me through more than a decade of careful saving, of sacrifice, of hope. And as I sat in my car outside that hospital with my tears finally drying, I remembered that account. I remembered the fund I'd built, with quiet sacrifice and endless patience, dollar by precious dollar. That money had always been meant as a gift of pure love, but now, in the aftermath of their cruelty, it would become something else entirely. It would become the key to my revenge. Because love can be twisted into anger, but it can also be reshaped into justice that lasts longer than any tantrum. And I was about to make sure Emily and Jason would never touch a single cent of what I'd built through years of blood and sweat. That night, with my heart still raw from rejection, I drove home and sat at my kitchen table with a pen and paper spread before me. I laid out everything: account numbers, balance sheets, years of careful savings I'd protected like a treasure chest. For the first time, I didn't see it as Emily's gift. I saw it as my weapon of justice. The idea came slowly, but once it took root in my mind, it felt like it had always been there waiting. If Emily and Jason wanted me erased from their lives, if they wanted to pretend I didn't exist, then I would erase them from this legacy. The money would skip right past them, locked safely away until my grandson was old enough to claim it himself. I met with a lawyer I'd trusted for years, a man who knew my story and understood the depth of my love for my family. I explained what I wanted: a scholarship fund established in my grandson's name, completely untouchable by his parents until he turned 18. The lawyer raised his eyebrows at first, but when he saw the steel in my eyes, he nodded slowly. "You want to make sure he has a future," he said. "No," I replied firmly, my voice steady as granite. "I want to make sure his parents can't control it. This is between me and him. No one else gets to touch what I built." Together we drafted paperwork that was ironclad, bulletproof. Every dollar I'd saved, every drop of sweat I'd poured into that fund over the years, was redirected into a trust designed to bloom when my grandson turned 18. Education, opportunity, stability, all of it would be his, and his alone, waiting like a beacon in his future. But until then, his parents would hold nothing but empty hands and the bitter knowledge that they'd thrown away their chance. When I left that lawyer's office, the crushing weight in my chest lifted for the first time since that horrible night at the hospital. I imagined a day years in the future when my grandson would learn the truth, that while his parents turned me away, I had been silently watching over him, building a bridge to his future with every paycheck. It wasn't revenge born of anger or violence. It was revenge forged from patience, from wisdom, from love that refused to be destroyed. And it would cut deeper than any outburst could, because it would last a lifetime. The days after the hospital blurred together in a haze of suffocating silence. My phone sat on the kitchen counter like a dead thing, never ringing with the calls I desperately hoped for. Not once did Emily reach out to ask if I was okay, to bridge the chasm that had opened between us. Not once did Jason send even a cold message to smooth things over. Weeks crawled by, and all I had were whispered scraps from distant relatives who still spoke to both sides. The baby's healthy. He's growing fast. They seem happy. Happy without me. Every evening after work, I would sink into my worn armchair and stare at the empty picture frames I'd bought in anticipation. I'd imagined filling them with photos of my grandchild, first smiles, tiny fingers wrapped around mine, the soft weight of him sleeping against my chest. Instead of memories, I had emptiness. Instead of laughter, I had silence that echoed through my house like a tomb. Sometimes, late at night, when the loneliness became unbearable, I would drive past their house, not to intrude, not to be seen, just to catch a glimpse of the warm light glowing behind the nursery curtains. I'd sit in my car at the curb with the engine off, watching shadows move behind the glass. I told myself that was enough, that just knowing he was there, alive and breathing, was better than nothing. But each time I drove away, the ache in my chest grew heavier, more suffocating. Still, I never picked up the phone. I never begged or pleaded. The humiliation at that hospital door was carved too deep to risk opening that wound again. Instead, I poured all my energy into the trust fund. Every payday, I added a little more. I tracked investments, watched numbers grow, imagined the day that money would blossom into opportunities my grandson could hold in his own hands. Loneliness became my constant shadow, but so did unshakable resolve. I told myself over and over, this pain is temporary. One day, he'll know the truth. One day, he'll see who really stood for him when everyone else turned away. I missed his first Christmas, his first steps, the sound of his first laugh. I missed seeing his first tooth, his first solid food, his first words. Every milestone passed without me, like I'd never existed at all. But I didn't break. I couldn't afford to break, because to bend, to give in, and beg for scraps of their attention would mean letting Jason win completely. And I'd already decided. I may have lost my daughter to his manipulation, but I would not lose my grandson. It was a cold evening in late winter, when the silence finally shattered. My phone buzzed against the kitchen counter, and for a moment I just stared at the screen in disbelief. The name blinking back at me wasn't Emily's. It was Jason's. For the first time since that nightmare at the hospital, he was calling me directly. My first instinct was to let it ring, to ignore him the way they'd ignored me for months. After all the humiliation, after all the nights I'd sat in this chair aching for a grandson I wasn't allowed to hold, what right did he have to suddenly reach out? But something, call it curiosity, call it father's instinct, made me slide my thumb across the screen. Hello? His voice was completely different. Gone was the arrogant, dismissive tone I'd grown to hate. Instead, it trembled with something I'd never heard from him before. Desperation. Dad, we need your help. For several heartbeats, I couldn't respond. The word Dad, Kagame, did me completely off guard. He'd never called me that before. It was always, your father, or just him, when he bothered acknowledging me at all. But now, in his shaking voice, I heard raw fear. I stayed silent, letting him continue. He cleared his throat, tried to steady himself, but the tremor wouldn't leave his words. It's the baby. He's sick. The doctors say he needs surgery, and we don't have the money. His words spilled out jagged and panicked, each one carrying a weight I'd never heard from this arrogant man who'd once smirked as security dragged me away. Before I could even process a response, I heard Emily's voice breaking through in the background. Not the cold, dismissive tone she'd used at the hospital, but something raw and desperate, the voice of my little girl again. Dad, please, it's me. Her words came between sobs. I know we haven't spoken, but we don't know what else to do. The surgery is expensive, and insurance won't cover everything. We've tried banks, we've tried loans, but... Her voice dissolved into tears, and for a moment I closed my eyes and just listened. That sound, her crying, was something I'd always rushed to comfort. From scraped knees to heartbreak, I'd always been there to catch her tears. Every instinct screamed at me to reach through that phone and take away her pain like I always had. But then the memory struck like lightning, standing at that hospital door, hearing her say those words that still cut like glass. "You'll just embarrass us." Jason's voice cut back in, sharper now, demanding, "Look, we don't have time for guilt trips. The baby needs surgery. If you care at all about your grandson, you'll help us." His tone was forceful, entitled, as though I owed them something after everything they'd done. Heat rose in my chest. How dare he speak to me like that? How dare he make demands after orchestrating the most humiliating moment of my life? But I stayed quiet, letting them pour out their desperation while I sat in the calm eye of their storm. Emily's sobs grew louder. "Dad, please. Please don't let him suffer because of our mistakes. He's your grandson. Just help us this once, please." Those words twisted in my heart because they carried truth wrapped in manipulation. He was my grandson, my blood, my responsibility in ways they couldn't understand. The silence stretched long enough that I could hear Jason's impatience boiling over. "So what's it going to be? Are you going to step up for once, or just sit there being useless?" Step up for once? The irony almost made me laugh out loud. Step up? I'd spent my entire life stepping up, sacrificing everything for the family that had just cast me aside. But this time would be different. This time, I wouldn't step up for them. I would step over them. I let the silence linger a few more seconds, steadying my breath and preparing to deliver words that would change everything. When I finally spoke, my voice was calm. Too calm, perhaps. The kind of dangerous calm that comes after a storm has torn through everything and left only crystal-clear purpose behind. "Emily," I said softly, "do you remember that night at the hospital? Do you remember the exact words you spoke when all I wanted was to see my grandson?" Her sobs quieted. I could almost hear the shame wrapping around her throat. Jason jumped in, defensive and sharp. "Oh, come on. You're really going to hold a grudge now? That was months ago. This is life or death. We don't have time for your hurt feelings." My feelings, as if being barred from the most sacred moment of my life was nothing but a scratch on my pride. "Jason," I said firmly, my voice dropping lower, "you waved security over like I was some dangerous stranger. You had me escorted out of my own daughter's life like I was garbage, and now you think you can call and demand my help?" He tried to interrupt, but Emily's voice broke through, trembling and desperate. "Dad, please. I was wrong. I was scared. I wasn't thinking clearly. Jason said it would be better that way, and I just—" Her words stumbled over themselves between sobs. "I wanted peace. I didn't mean to hurt you so badly." For a split second, my heart clenched. I heard my little girl again. Not the woman who'd shut me out, but the child who used to crawl into my bed after nightmares. But Jason's impatience shattered that moment. "Enough of this emotional manipulation. Are you going to help or not?" I took another deep breath, steady and deliberate. "Jason, you seem to think you're still in control here, but let me make something crystal clear. You lost that control the night you chose arrogance over respect. And Emily, you lost it when you chose silence over standing by your father." The line went quiet, heavy with tension. I could almost feel their desperation clawing through the phone. Then I added, my voice calm but final, "So no, I won't give you what you're asking for, because what I've built over the years was never meant for you to touch." Jason exploded first, his voice cracking with rage. "What do you mean not for us? You're his grandfather. You're supposed to help when family needs it." I let his words hang in the air for a moment, then answered with the steadiness of absolute certainty. "I have helped, more than you'll ever understand. For years, I worked myself to the bone and saved every penny I could, all with one purpose, making sure my family had a secure future." Jason tried to interrupt, but I didn't let him. "You see, every dollar I put aside, every sacrifice I made, it's all still there, but it's no longer yours to touch. It's been moved, secured, protected in a scholarship fund, locked away in your son's name." I paused to let that sink in before delivering the final blow. "When he turns 18, he'll have everything I built for him. He'll have opportunities, choices, a future that no one, not even you, can steal from him or squander on your poor planning." The line went dead silent. I could picture Jason's face turning red, his fists clenching with impotent rage. Finally, he exploded. "You did what? That money should have been available for emergencies like this." I shook my head, even though he couldn't see me. "No, Jason, that money was never yours. It was always his. And unlike you, I made sure it would be safe from anyone who might waste it. You can't touch it, can't borrow against it, can't destroy what I spent 15 years building. Emily's voice broke through, small and fragile. Dad, why? Why would you do this to us? My throat tightened, but my resolve remained unshakable. Because, Emily, you made your choice that I'd at the hospital. You chose to shut me out, to treat me like I didn't belong in my own family. I can forgive you for the pain you caused, but I cannot trust you with what I spent my life building. That trust belongs only to my grandson. The silence that followed was filled with Jason's curses and Emily's quiet weeping, but I felt calmer than I had in months. They had asked for my help, and I had given them the only answer that mattered. The future I'd built belonged to my grandson alone. The silence shattered with Jason's voice, sharp and venomous. You selfish old bastard! Do you even care if he lives? Do you want your grandson to die just so you can prove some pathetic point? His words were designed to cut, to guilt me, to tear at whatever remained of my resolve. But I didn't flinch. Don't you dare twist this, Jason, I replied, my voice steady as steel. Don't you dare pretend this is about me being selfish. I care about that boy more than you could ever comprehend. That's exactly why I made sure his future is bulletproof. I paused, letting my next words carry the full weight of months of pain. You wanted me out of your lives, remember? You stood there smirking while security dragged me away like a criminal. Now you want my sacrifice, but not my presence. You can't have it both ways. Emily's sobs grew louder, more desperate. Dad, please. I'm sorry. I was so wrong. I was just trying to keep peace. I thought it would make things easier for everyone. Her words dissolved into heartbroken cries, and for a moment every instinct I'd developed over 28 years of being her father screamed at me to comfort her, to make everything okay, like I always had. But then I remembered my wife's dying wish, her frail hand gripping mine as she whispered, "Protect her." And I realized that protecting Emily didn't always mean giving in to her tears. Sometimes it meant showing her the real weight of her choices. Sometimes it meant protecting her son from the very decisions she was making. Jason's fury reached a crescendo. You're pathetic, hiding behind lawyers and paperwork while your grandson suffers. If anything happens to him, his blood will be on your hands. I exhaled slowly, letting his rage wash over me like waves against solid rock. No, Jason, I said with quiet finality. If anything happens, it will be because you failed to plan, because you treated me like garbage, because you believed you could burn every bridge and still have me waiting to carry you across the wreckage. My conscience is clean. My grandson will have a future. Can you say the same about yourself? Emily cried harder. Jason cursed and ranted, but I no longer felt shaken by their desperation. Instead, I felt something I hadn't experienced since that night at the hospital. Peace. Deep, unshakable peace. For the first time in months, I knew I was doing exactly what needed to be done. After I hung up that phone, I sat in the silence of my living room with the device still warm in my trembling hand. My heart was heavy, yes, but it was no longer broken into pieces. For months, I had carried the weight of their rejection like chains around my soul, dragging me deeper into darkness with each passing day. But now, something fundamental had shifted inside me. Betrayal changes you in ways that can't be undone. It teaches you that love can be conditional, that loyalty can shatter like glass, and that the people you sacrifice everything for can become the ones who wound you deepest. I had learned that lesson in the cruelest way possible, standing outside a hospital door, barred from the very life I had helped create. But betrayal can also give birth to something powerful and lasting: wisdom. I realized that night that screaming, violence, and rage would have accomplished nothing except proving Jason right about me. He wanted me to be the bitter old man he'd painted me as in Emily's mind. He wanted me to lash out so he could point his finger and say, "See, this is exactly why he doesn't belong in our lives." But I didn't give him that satisfaction. Instead, I chose silence over shouting, patience over rage, and patience, I discovered, has a way of cutting far deeper than anger ever could. Because true revenge isn't about the immediate moment of satisfaction. It's about creating consequences that unfold over time, truth so undeniable that the people who wronged you are forced to live with them every single day for the rest of their lives. My truth was elegantly simple. They could not erase me, no matter how desperately they tried. I had planted myself in my grandson's future like a seed in fertile soil, and one day, when he was old enough to understand love that transcends cruelty, he would see me bloom in his life. They thought pushing me aside had stripped me of all power. They thought their rejection had made me irrelevant. But the very sacrifices they mocked, those long years of backbreaking work, those pennies saved through hunger and exhaustion, that relentless devotion they took for granted, had become my most potent weapon. And unlike rage, unlike fists and shouting matches, this weapon would not dull with time. It would grow sharper, more powerful with every passing year, waiting patiently for the moment it would reveal its true strength. Jason could rage until his voice gave out. Emily could drown in regret until her tears ran dry. But neither of them could undo what I had built through decades of quiet love. That is the true power of patient revenge, not to destroy everything in a blaze of fury, but to endure with purpose until justice reveals itself naturally. In the months that followed, I learned to embrace the solitude they had forced upon me. The house grew quieter, but so did my mind. I stopped jumping every time the phone rang, hoping it might be Emily with an apology. I stopped driving past their house at night, torturing myself with glimpses of the life I was excluded from. Instead, I found peace in routine. Work became my meditation. Evenings were spent reading, planning, tending to the trust fund that grew steadily like a secret garden. I added to it religiously, watching the numbers climb toward a future that would one day transform my grandson's life. Sometimes, when the loneliness felt overwhelming, I would write letters to him, letters he would never read until he was old enough to understand their weight. I told him about his grandmother, about the promises I had made and kept. I shared stories of his mother as a little girl, before the world complicated our love. I explained why I wasn't there for his early years, but how I had never stopped fighting for his future. Those letters became my therapy, my way of staying connected to the bond they tried to sever. Word travels fast in small communities, and faster still when family drama spills into public view. It didn't take long before whispers began circulating about what had happened at the hospital, about the trust fund, about the old man who had locked away his life savings rather than hand them over to his ungrateful daughter. Some relatives called me heartless. "How could you do that to your own child?" they demanded, their eyes sharp with judgment. They saw only the surface, a grandfather refusing to help in a medical emergency. They didn't see the years of sacrifice, the nights of hunger, the calloused hands from working 2 jobs just to keep Emily fed and clothed. They didn't feel the sting of being shoved aside at the most sacred moment of their lives. But there were others, quiet voices carrying deeper wisdom, who pulled me aside with different words. Neighbors who had watched me raise Emily alone, who remembered the nights I came home with grease on my clothes and exhaustion carved into my face, offered nods of respect and understanding. "You protected that boy the only way you could," one old friend told me over coffee. They may not see it now, but someday he will. Even within the extended family, not everyone agreed with Emily's choices. My sister, who had been like a second mother to Emily during those difficult early years, called me late one night. Her voice was heavy with disappointment, not in me, but in the girl we had both helped raise. "I can't believe she treated you like that," she whispered. "After everything you sacrificed for her. You don't deserve this pain. Don't you dare feel guilty for protecting what you built." Still, I stayed mostly silent through the gossip and judgment. I didn't argue or try to explain myself to people who couldn't understand the full story. Because deep in my heart, I knew something they didn't. The truth doesn't need defending when it's built on solid ground. It reveals itself in time, patient and inevitable as sunrise. Jason and Emily might curse my name today. They might tell everyone who would listen that I abandoned them in their hour of need. But when the morning came, when my grandson opened that first letter and claimed the future I had built for him, the truth would speak louder than any rumor or bitter accusation. The nights grew quieter after that phone call, settling into a rhythm of solitude I had never chosen, but was learning to navigate. My phone no longer buzzed with desperate pleas, and the silence that followed became its own kind of answer. Emily and Jason had made their position clear. They wanted me erased from their present, and so they simply pretended I had never existed. Yes, the loneliness cut deep. There were mornings I woke reaching for my phone out of habit, hoping against hope that maybe there would be a message from Emily saying she was sorry, saying she wanted her father back in her life. But those messages never came, and each empty morning I reminded myself not to expect what was no longer mine to have. Yet beneath that familiar ache, something stronger had taken root, genuine peace. I would sit at my kitchen table with morning coffee, reviewing the trust paperwork, double-checking every clause and protection I had built into my grandson's future. Every time I read through those documents, calm certainty settled in my chest like warm sunlight. My grandson was safe. His parents might despise me with every breath, but the future I had carved for him remained untouchable, growing stronger each month like a tree extending deeper roots. That knowledge became enough to keep me standing when the loneliness tried to drag me down. I began to see my isolation differently. It wasn't just emptiness. It was the price of doing what was right, even when no one understood or appreciated the sacrifice. I had traded my place in their daily lives for his long-term security, and though the trade brought pain, it was one I would make 1,000 times over without hesitation. Because love, real, deep, unconditional love, isn't about being seen or praised or appreciated. It's about ensuring the people you care for are protected and provided for, even when they can't see your hand guiding their path. Sometimes, when the weight of silence grew too heavy, I would drive past their house again, not to intrude or cause trouble, just to park a little way down the street and watch the soft glow emanating from the nursery window. I never knocked, never made my presence known. I just sat quietly in my car, knowing that behind those walls lived a child whose future was already secured by my sacrifice. A child who would someday understand that his grandfather's love had never wavered, even when the world tried to convince him otherwise. Though I couldn't hear his laughter or witness his first steps, I would whisper to myself in that dark car, "One day, son, one day, you'll know the truth." Loneliness might have defined my present, but hope, unshakable, patient hope, that was my future, and it sustained me through the darkest nights. Looking back now, I understand that betrayal doesn't just change how you see other people, it fundamentally changes how you see yourself. The night they turned me away from that hospital, I felt like nothing, less than nothing, invisible, disposable. But sometimes, being treated like nothing gives you the clarity and strength to become something far greater than you ever imagined possible. I didn't scream or fight or break down their door in rage. I didn't hire lawyers to force visitation or threaten to destroy their lives out of spite. Instead, I chose patience over fury, wisdom over impulse, and in that deliberate silence, I discovered a way to protect the one person who truly mattered, my grandson. They denied me his first cry, stole from me the sound I had waited my entire life to hear, but they cannot steal his future. They cannot touch what I built through decades of quiet sacrifice. Revenge doesn't always have to roar with anger or burn bridges with violence. Sometimes the wisest revenge is the kind that waits, that endures in silence until truth reveals itself naturally, the kind that plants seeds in darkness and trusts time to bring them into the light. Jason and Emily may never understand the depth of what I accomplished by walking away that night. Perhaps they don't deserve to understand. But one day, when my grandson opens that letter, sees what I built for him, reads the story of how much his grandfather loved him, he will know beyond any doubt that someone fought for him when the whole world seemed determined to push that someone away. That thought fills me with peace deeper than any temporary satisfaction revenge could have brought. It reminds me that love, when it's genuine and selfless, can outlast betrayal, humiliation, and even the crushing weight of loneliness. My wife asked me to protect our daughter, and in the most important way possible, I kept that promise. I protected her child, the future she brought into this world, from the very people who should have been his greatest advocates. In doing so, I honored not just her dying wish, but the bond between grandfather and grandson that no amount of cruelty could ever truly sever. If you're listening to this story, and you've ever given your heart completely to someone who pushed you aside, know this: your worth is not defined by how they treat you. Your strength is not measured by their recognition or approval. Sometimes, the most powerful response to betrayal isn't anger. It's wisdom that lasts longer than their cruelty ever will. If you've been through pain like mine, share your story below and subscribe.